And welcome back to Think Global Do Justice. Happy April, everyone. Hey, there's a conversation that I'm really excited to get into today with a couple friends of the show. Before I do, want to give a shout out to our partners at the Accord Network. If you guys have not gotten onto their website recently, go to accordnetwork.org. There are memberships there. There are events coming up. So much to plug into. So encourage you guys, check out our partners at the Accord Network. Um, Today, I'm joined by two leaders that are no strangers to the show. Julie, it's been a little while. Ellie, I feel like we're getting maybe just like annually or maybe every other year and a half, we get the one Miss Elli Oswald on the show. But we have quite the occasion for conversation today because recent research has come out from Barna, which Faith to Action and Martin James Foundation were both a part of. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. So, friends, I am joined today by Elli Oswald. She is the executive director at the Faith to Action Initiative, a longtime collaborator on this podcast, and just a real thought leader, galvanizing people towards family-based care. And Julie Walton is also joined. Martin James Foundation was a part of this initiative to bring this study to bear, and they're doing really important work getting behind family-based care throughout the world. And of course, Julie also has a practitioner background, has worked with other OVC organizations. So Elli, Julie, welcome to Think Global Do Justice. How are you guys doing?
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, I'm feeling jealous that both of you are coming from the Pacific Northwest, so I'm imagining it's quite a bit cooler than it is here in Texas. So I'm missing my Tacoma. I wish I was up there with you guys in the same time zone, but great to be here.
You might not have said that yesterday because yesterday it was the like just dreariness and my California blood was just like, I am tired of this. But today, right now, it is sunny and it is cool. And it's cool in the attic. So excited to get into this. All right, guys. So we're gonna start from the top here. I'm thinking in 2020 when the first study came out, I'm sure I know that we've alluded to it at different points, and I know that it's kind of worked itself into different conversations, both on Think Orphan and on Think Global Do Justice. Barna is, of course, a renowned researcher, certainly in the faith-based space. They do really important work. And this study was just redone here, just wrapped up in 2025. Elli, I'm going to can you give us an introduction? What is the Barna study? What is it all about? Just kind of give us an introduction to this particular piece of work.
Yeah. So in October of 2025, just a few months ago, Barna conducted a survey of over 3,300 Christians in the United States, really focusing on understanding their perceptions and also support of orphanages and children's homes around the world. So Barna worked really hard to make sure that that sample was representative of the broader U.S. Christian community in the United States, with the demographics that would match that as closely as possible, because the goal is to be able to also make projections from this sample size to more broadly what the impact of U.S. Christians funding and mission trips makes globally. So it's actually, as you mentioned, a repeat, an improved, but a lot of repeated questions from 2020, 5 years ago. That study was released in 2021, and this one's 2026. And the goal there was to be able to compare and consider, has there been change and impact, but also to get real, fresh, current data on what's really going on in the U.S. church. I think the U.S. church has been through a lot rapidly in the last few years. So we really wanted to make sure that we had assumptions as we engaged that audience, that we have assumptions that are based on reality of what people are really thinking and doing in regards to how they desire to support orphaned and vulnerable children around the world.
Yeah, I like the kind of bookend approach. And I remember you discussing, that this was the plan from 2020. And like you said, I think starting anything in 2020 is an interesting time frame given what the world was like then. And yet it's important that we kind of have this. And what's interesting and has been interesting to me as I've gotten into the research has been just kind of juxtaposing and kind of seeing the trajectory, which is some of what we'll be covering in this podcast today. Julie, last time you were on the show, you were with an orphan care organization doing really important work in Southeast Asia. Now you're working for a foundation. I honestly, I don't, I'm trying to think. Have I had people, foundations are such a critical part of global development, but we don't often get people from there on. I would be interested kind of why was this a priority to your organization to get this data and to get this understanding?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about MJF, so sorry, Martin James Foundation, I'll probably call it MJF the bulk of the time, is one of my favorite things about our team is that they really legitimately approach this issue with an enormous amount of curiosity and humility. And I've never worked for a donor or been a donor before. I've certainly fundraised for the bulk of my career. And so I know what that side of it is. But then to work for a donor who doesn't walk into the room with any level of expectation of being heard, listened to first, that just because we have a certain amount of money, it's not massive, but we have this pocket of money we've been entrusted to, doesn't at all mean that we're the smartest people in the room. It doesn't mean that our opinion should be the loudest. And I just have found that so refreshing. And Martin James Foundation is not in itself a faith-based organization, but they do see this block, and we'll talk about how it's a growing block of donors that are giving to orphanages, children's homes, that represents, that's a significant force to be reckoned with. And so one of the things, though, that I appreciate is that I guess I would testify from the inside, they don't see that, and we don't see this group of Christians as an obstacle to be solved. We don't see them as a problem. We're not frustrated. It's not, so our interest in the study was not, we got to figure out how to change these people's minds. We don't feel that way. It's okay, this is a group of people who care about the same group of kids we care about. And so how can we understand where they're coming from more? And how can we engage? And that is consistent then with a couple other ways that we approach other things. So rather than us going and launching big initiatives on the continent of Africa, for example, that's not our place. So instead, we're supporting an organization called Transform Alliance Africa. That's local leaders, a constituency, and they're leading. They know it better. And so I think similarly, the partnership with Faith to Action was natural because Elli knows this work better. I'm very sorry for my golden doodle who would like to be on the podcast behind me. And so
Bring them on.
I know she is legitimately for the YouTube.
There you go.
There she is. So I apologize.
Literally staring at the camera. That's awesome.
She's ready. She's on camera ready. She does not understand the word podcast, that we're trying to record something. So I think it was an easy fit for us to work with Elli. How can we help understand this group of people better? How can we support then what you know is the best way to engage? And we've just really valued that. And then it's obviously been an interesting area of crossover for me since Julie on the podcast is a person of faith. So this is my community. I have lived experience of being a U.S. Christian who raised money for orphanages, like almost everyone in this space who I feel like is now on our side. That's our history. And so to think about how to approach that with humility and curiosity rather than skepticism. So that's why it was a priority for MJF and continues to be so. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Julie. And of course, anybody that's been listening to this show for a while, understands kind of our view of what's best for orphan and vulnerable children. So we don't want to bury the lead. A lot of what this study is looking at is giving trends specifically onto the other side of the care equation, which is funding and supporting orphanages, residential care facilities, children's homes, etc. So I appreciate the way that you frame that, Julie. Like, we're not trying to solve people, but we are wanting to know, hey, what's going on here and what should we be doing about it? Elli, you've been working in this space, well, first as a pastor here in the greater Seattle area, and then came over to Faith to Action years ago now. Oh, the Sarah Geserick days are long behind us all. Elli, why was this important for Faith to Action to get this data, both at 2020 and now?
Yeah. Yeah, the vision of Faith to Action is to catalyze support, not be the supporter, but to bring others to come around and support family-based solution for orphaned and vulnerable children. We're all very aware of, why that's important, but for those who aren't, there's growing consensus and significant evidence base that orphanages and children's homes aren't having the kind of impact that we all would have hoped, that we all want to see for children, recognizing there are negative impacts on neurological development, especially in young children, and social and emotional long-term challenges. Some people have experienced that personally, through international adoption, and many people have even seen hints of that on mission trips when you see kids kind of clinging to strangers and going, that doesn't seem quite right. Feels good, but doesn't seem quite right. So I think, internally we all kind of get it. But it's important that we recognize that family does, the family context provides a positive environment for development. And I always like to say it's more than that. It's a connection, it's belonging, it's identity. Brandon, you say these things every day, I'm sure, on this podcast. But I think for many people, it's more about believing if it's possible. Of course, a safe and loving family is the ideal, but is that really possible for kids? So, one of the major misconceptions we try to address is the reality that most kids in orphanages actually have parents. About 80%, multiple kind of studies brought together have continued to recognize that global number. About 8 out of 10 children have at least one living parent, if not two. And so many of those parents could care for their child if given support to be able to do that. They're often in crisis. They have the underlying challenge of poverty and are often in a desperate place when a child is either removed from their home or they place that child in the facility. And for those parents who are not a safe place, we know that all these children have other relatives that could potentially provide a safe, loving space, family for that child. And even beyond that, are there alternatives like foster care and adoption, especially through the local church? So I think our mission is to help people believe that it's possible. We all know this is a growing movement to move away from relying on residential care, orphanages and children's homes as the kind of first offering for a family in crisis, to move towards family-based solutions for these children and these families. So as we see all of this transition happening, individual organizations returning children to family, whether that's biological or foster or whatever, and then organizations making the shift to bring services directly to families, and we see governments making this shift and all of that. What I hope as the leader of Faith to Action is that the church in the United States isn't lagging behind in this change, but that in fact we are leaders of it, and that we can shine kind of the vision that we have in creation, that God created family as the ideal structure for all of society, let alone, the best place for children. And we see scripture talking about how God actually sets the lonely in family. And we know family is broken, but it's possible to bring restoration. And so it was really important for us to understand the U.S. Christian mindset, because we believe there's so much opportunity there, right? Mm-hmm. Julie kind of hinted at this. This isn't about blaming anybody. This is about connecting with people's innate godly desire to love and serve children who are very vulnerable. So yeah, when we first did that first Barna study in 2020, we did it because we needed to better understand not only the perceptions, but the scope of the challenge. Mm-hmm. What does this actually look like? How much money are we talking about? How many people are we talking about? And coming out of that, there was a bit of shock from many of us in the sector. Whoa, we knew it'd be a lot, but 2.5 billion a year, that was that initial number of how much money was going from Christian individuals, not churches, not foundations, not even any major individual givers, just individuals giving usually small amounts. That added up to 2.5 billion for the U.S. Christian population. So, you know, we kind of leaned into doing something together. And the belief that we had was that if people know better, they'll do better. And so we were able to collaborate really broadly over the last 5 years. We created this kind of collaborative communications effort. It never really had a name, but over 90 organizations participated in it. We had multiple consultants providing media training or media work, social media engagement. We were sharing tools and resources, really trying to push out the knowledge piece. The main misconceptions help U.S. Christians. If they knew better, they would do better. And so that was our big approach, pushing that out for 4 years. So this kind of check-in 5 years later was really important to see, you know, I don't know if we can say we've shifted the needle, but has the needle moved?
Yeah.
And if so, what's next, and how do we kind of frame and lead collaboration to continue to see the U.S. Christian community be a part of the really good work to see more children in safe and loving families.
So one of the things that you alluded to there, Ellie, and we'll get into the findings here in a second, but one of the things that you said, and I know that this is your heart, I mean, literally it's Faith to Action Initiative. You guys are an explicitly Christian-based initiative. You said, I don't want the church to be a lagger, so to speak. It's an interesting thing because Christians, and again, the Barna study is specifically looking at Christians, so there may not exist a sample outside of this research, like specifically within care reform, but anecdotally, so we can all just speak anecdotally, and then we'll get into the actual hard data from the Barna study. It kind of seems like Christians are, I don't know, generally more generous than non-Christians, right? Okay, you're both nodding your head, so at least anecdotally, we feel like that's accurate. And they are also at the same time like donating a lot of money into this space, specifically on the residential side. Do you feel, Ellie, like the church is lagging in practice? Like, are non-Christians potentially, at least maybe how we might feel, more likely to support family-based care? Ellie, what do you think?
That's a tough one, Brandon. I have to give Christians credit because what I'm seeing, especially in the last 10 years, is incredible leadership of Christians around the world to be engaging with governments at the highest level for care reform in their countries, along with doing their own stuff on the ground. I mean, we could start to name names. Much of it, many of those programs being funded by Americans, and I think I can't say we're not leading because there's just so much incredible work going on around the world that is really incredibly exciting. I think it's maybe kind of the step away from the programming, the donor who doesn't
Mm.
even quite know where their money's going.
Hmm.
That can be more challenging, and we can look more at why even the data has highlighted maybe their connection and their heart connection to orphanages and the idea of who they are and how they feel about it. But I think we really need to consider the kind of broad mindset, like the cultural mindset that says orphans need orphanages, right? Because that is becoming troublesome, because that can be, it can be utilized to fund things that aren't working great for kids. And instead of getting behind some of these incredible Christian ministries that are on the forefront of expanding family-based solutions in the countries where they're working.
Yeah, really well said. It's just funny because I was thinking about it. It came up in a conversation recently that I was having, and I remember years ago when I was still running Kingdom Families, writing a blog post and like wanting to find like some generic images to like include on this blog post I was writing. And I came across an image of somebody from the military at an orphanage. And it made me also think of like some of these volunteerism groups that come out of Europe. Like they're like it's not a solely Christian thing. Like other people need that shift as well. I would just be fascinated to like almost like if we can all scrounge up enough pennies, that'll be the next research project. Let's just survey the whole global care apparatus. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, it-
We
it-
need that. We do.
we need that, and we also need this, especially for us as Christians. And you can't really go with a better outfit than Barna to run these. So, Ellie, I want to kind of stay on with you, especially you look at the 2020, now compare it 5 years later. What are the most important findings? What are some of the things that kind of stuck out from this research?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying that I get real nervous before these kind of things come to me. Like, what is the data gonna say? I'm running through all the different scenarios, and I was super happy to see that there is definitely a shift in knowledge. And again, that was kind of our first assumption. If people know better, they'll do better. So a lot of concentration on knowledge, and we more U.S. Christians are becoming aware of some of those misconceptions that have essentially fueled support for orphanages and children's homes for decades now. One of them being understanding that poverty is the major driver to orphanage placement. So we saw the most increase in knowledge there, 26% increase from 5 years ago. Barna projected that out. That would represent about 51 million additional people projected out to the US Christian population. Praise God, there's a better understanding of why kids end up in residential care, kind of those root causes. Interesting, we saw like the most gains amongst Protestants, which is interesting. And we also
Meaning
saw
mainline Protestants,
both, well, the two, both mainline
evangelicals as well. Okay.
and yeah, non-mainline is how we categorize them, mainline and non-mainline Protestants. And then also we saw most increase among young people. So that was good. There's been some confusing things around young people because they've also increased their giving.
I
But
have young people in my home. It's very confusing.
yes, we think that it's more about the generation growing into a place of actually being able to give charitably than it is about them being more connected to orphanages and children's homes because their giving percentage went up, but their knowledge went up too. So this is the whole story, right? So the other thing I'll mention with knowledge is we saw some good change in regards to people's ideas of the role that orphanages play. People saying that orphanages are a positive place. That dropped by 10% from 5 years ago. And even people who said that they're essential, that they play an essential role, that dropped by 9%. So there's some wrestling. People are thinking differently a little bit. But here's the big piece. Despite those, I think, perspective or knowledge changes, behavior has not changed. So compared to 2020, 9% more Christians say that they are financially supporting residential care, orphanages and children's homes. We did see a shift towards those younger donors, like I mentioned, and also pretty significant increase among Catholics. It used to be pretty even across the three, mainline, non-mainline Protestants and Catholics, and now we saw Catholics kind of surge up in this data, and Protestants, especially non-mainline Protestants, reduced. So interesting happening. I think non-mainline donors were down 22%. So there's a win to celebrate, but overall 9% up. And with the growth of population in the United States, that's why you see that number go from 2.5 billion all the way up to 4.5 billion. We also saw a little bit of an increase in the average of giving from 100 to 115 per year. But still, these small amounts, when you're talking about 20, when you're talking about a third of the population, it adds up. So we also saw with mission trips, there wasn't any real change over 5 years either, both going on mission trips, but also interest in future mission trips. They still want to visit orphanages. So, the question that remains is, if we know better, why aren't we doing better? And questioning this main assumption that if people know better, they'll do better. And I'll just quickly say, I think, as we reflect on it, one is we are seeing changes in specific demographics. So I think that's important to recognize that we have seen pretty significant progress in some of the demographics. And then two, and probably the second biggest aha for me is that people love their orphanages. The most common reason people gave for why they give to an orphanage is because it makes them feel good.
Yeah.
They didn't say because it's helping children.
Right.
And so we make decisions based on how we feel, not necessarily always what
Yeah.
we think. I mean, ideally we align those things, but people have big feelings. 81% of the people said that that donation to the orphanage was the most important thing that they give to. Essentially, the way they answered it was that even more than their local church giving.
Yeah.
So there's a deep emotional connection that is kind of trumping our knowledge
Right.
and really driving behavior.
Yeah, there's some really telling results in here, and there's also tension in it, which I hear you describing that we'll dive into some more. I want to hear from Julie. Julie, as you surveyed this, were there other areas that kind of stuck out to you just in terms of the findings?
I think Ellie hit a lot of the ones that, I mean, I think we reacted to similar ones. I suppose maybe one other one that I would pull out is that almost half of the donations are coming through child sponsorships. And that was initially, I'll just be honest that I feel like I've been on a real journey with this data, because that initially made me feel really grumpy because it just feels so, I don't know, we've all worked in child protection long enough that the thought of any of your children, a picture of them being distributed to someone in another country, you have no idea who it is, you might not speak their language, and the thought of your child's picture being on their refrigerator and them feeling such an outsized sense of importance, that's jarring. I don't have my own children, but if I think of any of the children that I love dearly, my honorary nieces and nephews, all of like the thought of them, that it kind of makes my brain hurt. And it is, I'll be candid, that is a place where I am likely to take a least generous view of that form of giving. But then as I was reflecting on it, and even preparing for our conversation, Ellie and I and some others were recently gathered in a room trying to metabolize this data. And something Ellie did at the beginning of the session is she pulled a chair to the front of the room. And she said, I want each of you in the room to picture a child that means a lot to you in this space, whether it's a child that you visited at an orphanage, a child you visited in a family-based setting. And dozens of names come through my head and faces. And the importance of centering that child in our conversation, I just started to wonder if that's how I need to think of these child sponsorship donors, that is their anchor point, is that they, in a world of approximately 1,000 needs for every 2 that I can actually meet, they've chosen to pick this, and they're attached to this child. And I think we still should challenge the modality of that giving. We have to challenge some of the assumptions. I'll leave it maybe at that, underneath that, and to recognize that that's someone who has chosen to pay attention to a kid that for all intents and purposes will never benefit their life. They're not ever hoping to gain anything from that child. They're not physically related. It's not any sort of, it's a chosen bond that donor has said, I'm going to choose to be bonded to this kid. And I think that there is something beautiful in that, even while I think there's also, we have to hold the tension of, there's also maybe some unhealthy dynamics in the way that mechanism is being distributed, all of that. But that was really, I did not expect that to be that high. So for that to account for, so if it's $4.5 billion, that's $2 billion that's coming through child sponsorship. So that really stuck out to me. And then I think the other thing that I've been, again, on my journey with this data of going from grumpy to trying to be more optimistic about it, is that I think, I'm not a behavior change expert by any means, but I think that our findings on the gap between knowledge and practice would tell us that we're right on track. And then I just can think of, and you have a puzzled face. I think I can think in my own.
This is where my head was going, was like there's such a disconnect, it seems. So I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Behavior change theory.
Yeah, keep going, Julie.
I'll
Keep
give
cooking.
you a really silly example. A couple years ago, a book club that I'm a part of, we read a book on mouth breathing. Have any of you ever done any studying on mouth breathing? That mouth
I can
breathing
tell you
is...
which people in my family are mouth breathers now.
Okay, so it's
I also
bad
think
for
of
your
Stranger
teeth.
Things. Mouth breather. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't think I could handle that show.
It's a lot.
I have a sensitive heart. It doesn't take a lot to just push me off a cliff. So, not saying that you don't. I'm just saying you got to know your own limits. So, mouth breathing, it's bad for your teeth, it's bad for your hydration, all of that. I read the book, was 100% convinced. The science seemed solid to me. The two authors did 6 weeks where they only breathed through their mouth and 6 weeks where they only breathed through their nose. The marked difference, I was sold. If you had surveyed me immediately after reading that book, I would have answered like the Christians in this Barna study. I believe now nose breathing is better. Have you done anything about it? Nope. Because all of the options, taping at night, all of that were too expensive to me. It was like $2 a night. And I'm just not we work in the field of orphaned and vulnerable children, right? So I am not a millionaire. And I can't imagine spending $2 a night just on a piece of tape. So I was in that gap. I knew that something would be better for my health, but I had done zero about it. We could also look at some of the sugar that is presently in my kitchen cabinet. There's all sorts of things that we know cognitively would be better if we took a step. So then fast forward, and I'm a random fashion influencer. Okay, we can just have that be part of my persona. One of the fashion influencers that I follow on Instagram had just discovered that this one athletic tape is soft enough that if you cut it into strips, it can work. And so that equates to like 20 cents a night. I bought the tape that day and have been mouth taping since and can testify that I do feel better. I wake up, my mouth doesn't feel gross. I feel less thirsty. So I think that that's where, and not to tip too much of Elli's hand, but I think part of what she's working on that's so brilliant is this feasibility gap. So how is it possible that we are overly accrediting this group of donors with being significantly more stubborn than they actually are? And we just have not provided a feasible solution to do something different. So they may be stuck between wanting to do something different and knowing how to do it. The same way I was convinced of the science of the mouth breathing, but I hadn't found a solution that worked into my life yet and my budget and my all of that. And so I resonate with, and that helps me. That's where I think we're maybe on track, that all change. I also think if we studied any other population in between what they know and what they should do different, I don't think we would find that this Barna study tells us that US Christians are this crazy anomaly and we're progressing so much slower than everybody else. I think of Malcolm Gladwell's research on the tipping point. It just takes time. And so that's in the sense where I think the gains that we've seen in knowledge are more significant than we might even think they are. And I'd really credit Elli and the work that she's led. That is a bigger deal than even, and I think we're going to see, I think if we do this study again in 5 years, and I hope that we do, then we'll see, it's starting as we begin to introduce more feasible ways for the average person who cares about this, who doesn't have a job like mine or yours, who gets to engage in this all day, every day. How do they participate in this right now? How do they actually feasibly? And most of their ideas, all of us in the sector would be like, well, don't do that. Like, so many of the things have unintended consequences on the other side. So how do we make that streamlined?
Yeah,
so maybe that's a silly example, and
no,
I would
not silly at all. I think it's very perceptive, and I'm not going to assume that mouth tape would work on a beard like mine, but nonetheless, I
thankfully
I'll have
have
to
no
find a
lived
different
experience
beauty
with a
influencer.
beard on my face. So yeah.
Elli, you kind of perked up when we started talking behavior change. This is something you and I have discussed before. This gap is there. People are better understanding the situation and also more fueling it financially. That's a strange juxtaposition. What do you kind of make of it?
Yeah, I think when I started kind of in leadership at Faith to Action, it felt to me like we were just throwing things at the wall in some ways. Like we were filling gaps, really important gaps with knowledge and collaborative kind of learning and sharing messaging and things like that. But I really needed to figure out, where are we going? What's the plan? And so I'm like, what causes people to change, right? And love the world of behavior change and social change theory. So helpful in every aspect. I mean, Julie used this example of mouth tape, but let's talk about things like getting healthy, right? That's the example I always think of, is we know what we're supposed to eat, but it's hard to do that, especially when you're in a society that is not doing that, right? So that's a social piece. So we've been taking a behavior change process for years now. And, the simplest kind of way of thinking about it is just that change happens in a sequence, and it's not necessarily always super linear, but there's knowledge that you learn something before you don't know it. So there's that stage, and then you learn something, but your knowledge has to shift to your attitude. And so that's that heart shift that I talk about. And it can sometimes look like a commitment, can sometimes look like emotions, but it's moving from I know this to I feel this, and I want to be a part of it. And then often there's when you talk behavior change, it's skills. They gotta have skills to actually do it, right? So how do you count calories? How do you tape that on your mouth or whatever? With donors, I think often that is like, what is the channel for giving? And then behavior change follows. Then the actual behavior changes. So we try to measure impact we look at knowledge, attitude, and behavior. So anything we do, we look at that. Did it, and we count, knowledge, even if behavior hasn't changed, as a win, because we know it's a step, and everybody needs to be able to take a step. And I think that this very clear, I mean, for me, it's very clearly said we're in the midst of that attitude behavior shift, and that we still have to push the knowledge out there. Let's not stop pushing out the messaging and then the information like we're doing here today. But we have to lean into helping connect their heart to this, giving them opportunities to that, and providing mechanisms that they can easily engage with. The other piece about behavior change that makes it social change, which goes to this like tipping point idea, is the context of if you are making a decision isolated, like it will not be sustained. So if I decide I'm going to eat better, if I live in a household where everybody eats bad, it's not going to work. So how do we also create an enabling environment for people to make that change where they think, hey, I'm not the only one doing this. This church down the street is doing it as well. And I heard about it on the radio. So it's kind of saturating the environment around Christians to make them feel like they're not the outlier. They're actually a part of a movement. And it's an exciting thing to be a part of. So yeah, I feel very positive about the direction we're going. It was hard to see 4.5 billion. I'm not going to lie. It hurt.
Yeah.
But I believe in God's timing and his transformative work. And I'm just going to take a next step. We're all just going to take a next step in what he's doing with the person in front of us, and engage and keep engaging.
Yeah, it is interesting also when you think about what has been happening globally over that 5-year period. You're basically starting the research during COVID and then ending it with the shutting down of USAID. That's an interesting trajectory when it comes to global development. And you guys there were some questions in here even on like what should the role of the American government be. There's obviously international frameworks that are in place from the UN. Going back to Sarah, she was with USAID, advising on vulnerable children. So like we've actually made some really good inroads on that front. But now it's kind of like, I don't know. It will be interesting to kind of see now that so much of that has kind of been gutted. What effect is that going to have? Like, I honestly don't know. Obviously, this is a lot of private donors, but still, it's all within the same kind of sphere of support. I do kind of want to get towards that action piece.
I'm going to pick up on that
Yeah,
government
please.
piece too. We really wanted to understand if COVID had an impact in 2020. We didn't find a lot of evidence that U.S. Christian individuals cared more or less for orphans globally based on that data. So it wasn't a huge part of the findings then. We also wanted to understand if we're seeing a shift in people's ideas of the government's role or not. And actually some media have picked up this story without any push of our own. And it's mostly been around that question, around the government's responsibility and our own responsibility and the church's responsibility. So I've spent a little time in other projects also in this area, but compared to 2020, more U.S. Christians right now from the study believe that the government should play a bigger role in caring for vulnerable children globally. So 74% of Christians believe U.S. government should take more responsibility for seeing children cared for in families around the world. So that number was up, actually, I think about 5%. There was more young people that felt that way versus older people. So that could potentially be an impact of seeing the federal cuts happen last year. We didn't directly get that information. One of the hard parts I think we are also seeing, though, is a decrease in people's personal responsibility. And I want to learn more about that. I don't feel like my assumptions are based in real data and knowledge. It could be that there's a desire to not be, the savior for a different country and save all the children. Maybe that's like a healthy thinking process. Or it could be people have crisis fatigue and they are overwhelmed by the needs in their own backyard, let alone across the world. But it's a really interesting piece of data that I think we need to lean into and continue to learn more about.
Yeah, that is interesting. With the government piece, that's particularly interesting because that statement is being made while at the same time PEPFAR, USAID, like these things are diminishing, right? Okay, let's talk more application. Like, Julie, what do you think this means? You guys are tapped in not just with Christian organizations, but others. You mentioned Transform Alliance Africa, which love the work that they do. And what do you think that what are the indications here for kind of care reform more broadly?
I think one of the light bulb moments for me is, like, if you picture the team of people that's working on this, I think we have more people on our team than maybe we would recognize and potentially even choose. And that probably sounds harsh, but it's like if we're only picking to be on the team people who align 100% so far, then our team maybe is smaller. But these are people who are, I think we have a bunch more partners and collaborators in this space than maybe we have realized. And I think the challenge for the sector writ large is to view them as potential allies, potential advocates, potential teammates, rather than an obstacle. And I think we're going to see a watershed on that one. This is my own observation, so I won't pin this on the foundation, though we did discuss it as a team, is that it can be tempting to respond to this data like, why are US Christians doing this? Like, just like, it almost like, who is this group of idiots and why? I'm not saying that anyone has said those exact words, but there can have that feel. And we really chewed on it as a team. And we have multiple different faith and non-faith perspectives on my team. And all of us said that's not the right way to view this data. These are people who are with us. And I think of my own journey. So this year marks 10 years that I left Tacoma, Washington, where I had built my adult life, and moved to Washington, D.C. to get a master's degree because I wanted to understand how policy decisions were made in this. And at that time, 10 years ago, Julie, this month, March 2016, that Julie believed that the world had gotten it wrong on orphanages. I believed that they did not understand what I had seen, that they didn't understand the crucial role. And surely they had only ever visited terrible orphanages, and the ones that I had supported were beautiful. And I would still stand with those people who were serving those children. They were doing the best that they knew to do. So it's kind of wild to me to think if you were to go back and talk to that Julie and tell her what now Julie is doing, I think she would have been mad. It's worked on her a little bit since then. She's a little bit more patient in general than and I'm a little bit more patient than she was in general. But it's just even to reflect on my own journey and to think about the people who made the biggest impact in my journey were the people who listened to my questions, who listened to all of my whatabouts. Well, what about this? What about this? What about, are we sure? The people who caught me in a moment and were willing to listen. And I don't love that as being my action point, because I don't prefer to spend very much time listening to people with whom I disagree. Would be my own candid, selfish, right? Like all of us would just rather get our own points in and we want to listen to make our next point. But I wonder if our most effective work in this space is going to be sitting with these donors. Tell me your concerns with what I'm proposing. What have you seen? Talk to me about the kids that are on your mind. Talk to me about the kids in the picture on your fridge. Talk to me about the kids who sit in photo albums that you have deep personal connection with, and to take the time to listen, and without an expectation of that conversation being like a slam dunk and I'm going to get my 3 points in and they're going to change their mind and immediately start, but to be willing to hunker in with them. And I can think of the people who did not treat my concerns that way. And it not only didn't help me take steps, it caused me to further entrench in my view, because I then had an even greater sense of I have to protect these children from people like you who do not understand and who are trying to get rid of this mechanism that's keeping these children alive. And I recognize how arrogant, and also I'm not aware of myself in that. But the people that helped me were the people who listened, the people who were willing to hear me out and share my concerns, and then show me how those same concerns, what Ellie said earlier, it's possible for you to meet those needs in the environment of a family, and it's actually better. And then I think I'll speak briefly. I almost hesitate to do this because these are new shoes that I wear, but as a donor, I think we would, one of our favorite things to do is that there's conversations we get invited into as funders that others don't get invited into. And we are all day, every day ringing the bell. If you want to do anything good in the world, start with children. This is worth and the most vulnerable children that is a dollar spent that will always, always, always reap enormous benefit. I don't personally love that most of our arguments for investment into children rely on a negative counterfactual. We tend to pitch why it's important to invest into children by painting the awful picture of what happens when we don't. I get why that makes sense in an economic argument, SROI models, all of that. But in general, I would prefer to just, this child is worth it because they're worth it. That's maybe optimistic of me. But I think that's where I think one of the ways to apply this is to put our money where our mouth is. So anyone who's listening who has control over a single dollar, is there a way that you can devote that to family solutions instead of orphanages? So we may not, I almost feel conflicted. I think we need to do both. Address the $4.5 billion. I'll leave that to Ellie because that's much more her area of expertise. But while we're hoping that tide shifts, let's not waste any time with also then just not recruiting as many dollars towards what we know works as possible. So the money that you have control over, put that towards family-based solutions. If you need help finding one, any of the three of us would love to recommend. I can think of a dozen names off the top of my head, if not more. So there's good work happening. Let's get behind that while we invite our friends to join us there.
Yeah. Okay. Ellie, how about you? How are you going to shift the 4.5 bill? I think we're needing you to answer that for us. No. How do you, especially within Christian, spaces, what do you think about application of these findings?
Yeah, well, I think some of the things we can take, and I would invite people to engage with the data and learn, is what audience are ripe for engagement. I think Julie hinted at a lot of what I'm thinking, maybe in a slightly different angle, but there's so much opportunity to invite people into this work. I think young people are a key audience, not just because they're young, but just what they've seen in the world, where their heart is. Great opportunity there. But yeah, I think so helping us identify those places to invest our efforts to bring people along. And then really trying to get into their shoes, consider what is driving funding, really taking what we call an empathetic approach to fully aligning your thinking with what they care about, and then having that conversation instead of thinking about where you want to get them, right? Let's meet them and let's journey together. So you have to understand people, and the Barna study has given us some insight into that. There's other research too that can help to do that. I think one of the biggest things is it's an emotional connection. I mean, we should know that outside of the Barna study. I mean, vulnerable children invoke emotion in anybody that has a beating heart. And so I think we need to really recognize the need to connect with people's deep instinctual desire to love and care for kids that are hurting. Um, I I really felt like, and Julie, you were probably in the meeting with me when I said this thing out loud that's like so simple, but recognizing that people do this because it makes them feel good. I was like, we have to make sure that we don't make them feel bad to feel good about giving to family-based care. And I mean, it's kind of something I've said or we've all said for years, but it really hit me. Like, we have to find a way, because no one's going to move away from something that feels really, really good to something that makes them feel terrible, like I did something wrong or whatever. And so it's not only strategic, but I think it is also, you know, my belief that God is guiding and leading in the hearts of Christians, and that for me to judge what God has done is not my place. But at the same time, it's also strategic. Like, let's bring people in the next step in their journey. So I think that's a really important finding that we need to actually do. Like, let's think about what we need to change and what we need to do to be able to do that. And I think tangibly, we have to work together to make funding family-based care more accessible. That skills piece, that doesn't really sound like a skill for a donor. Like writing a check isn't really a skill. Actually, for
People
young
don't write
people,
checks anymore.
it might be a skill that we'll have to figure out. Anyways, all that to say, can we make giving, can we make the opportunity to channel your funding to family-based care more accessible for Christians? And I say we have to do it together because it can't be fundraising for one organization. And that's what's happening now, right? All the organizations are kind of, fund us, we do good stuff, fund us, we do good stuff. Sometimes they say, we do orphanages. Like, it's almost like you don't want to tell people you don't, because you want to keep people excited about what you're doing. But that's fine, keep doing that, right? But can we collaboratively elevate the kind of the main vision and mission that brings us together to see children move from residential into family-based care, to see families strengthen so they never have to be separated. You can Google, if you want to serve an orphanage, you can Google that and get a million options on Google. But if you want to figure out a way to strengthen families, that's a much harder process of research and connections and all of that. And right now, I think, you know, like Julie said, we're very happy to help direct you to organizations that are doing that work. But I think we need to do even better. So there is an emerging collaboration happening. Julie had talked about the time we were together recently to try to think through, can we do this? But the goal is, again, to enable donors to easily give directly to quality work to see children return home or find family or remain in family. We have to make it easy. We have to make it positive. We have to make it exciting to be a part of this global care reform effort. Where children are able to come home and organizations are able to provide those family-based services.
There have been some attempts at this at different points. Nothing that's been sustained. It's funny because you were saying, like, if somebody Googles, you know, orphanages, they get 100 hits or whatever. I just did Google, and I was like, first I just did family-based orphan care support. And I think because of where I'm located, it was like, here's Department of Children, Youth, and Families for, you know, Washington State or whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay. CAFO was number 4, so that's okay. Now I just added the words Global South on it, and I started with BCN, voluntarily into an orphanage, orphanages in the Global South. Okay, whatever. And then I got Restoring Hope Asia, so shout out, Sean. Good job, dude.
Yeah.
And HCW was number 4. So, I mean, that's a very specific.
They might know your search history, Brandon. I don't know.
That's not unlikely, probably. Yeah. I am logged in under my Canopy International account, so that's probably true.
But even to know to search family-based solutions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Who knows that other than the 3 of us on this call, and, you know.
And I think you're right that we've tried this, and I think, you know, a while back, some of us worked on the Orphan Myth Project, and it was right on in regards to we need to make people aware of the myths which I think we've started to do, and then we need to be able to give them something to do. And so it's really building on the knowledge of not just that, but other efforts, including like illuminations. I don't know how much you know about illuminations. Do you know that? So it's
No, but when you mention orphan myth, I don't know. I was maybe a little too close to feel wonderful about it, but keep going.
what I said is we're learning and growing and taking a next step from that collective effort. I mean, I learned a lot in that process. But illuminations is an interesting example because on the ground, Peter Greer writes and talks about the collaboration for Bible translation that happened in the
Yeah.
last decade. And all of these people were like, well, let's get organized and let's do this more efficiently and all of that. And that was happening kind of on the ground level for translating the Bible in all the languages. But then they realized, why don't we invite funders into this in a way that we're not competing with each other, but we are showing them the big picture that we're all working towards. And so they created Illuminations, which is a funding mechanism that essentially is saying, we're going to translate the Bible in every language around the world. Actually, their indicators are, I can't remember them exactly, but something like that.
Hmm.
And then the money gets distributed out to
Okay.
actors who
Yeah.
they've strategized around, okay, how can we do this the most efficient way? So that's the kind of thing I'm
Yeah.
thinking about. And I have some great thought partners, including Julie and others, who are thinking about how we could do something like that with
Okay.
US Christians.
Well, I trust your hand with it more than some other people that have attempted it. So let's get that set up, and then you come back on
Cool.
the show, and then we'll say, "Hey, everybody, we have the mechanism, the giving mechanism. Let's do this."
Let's do it.
All right, we are getting close to time here. Just really quick, just want to give each of you one more chance. Just what would be a good next step? We have all this data now. Um, and what are those next steps and who should be taking them? I'll go to Ellie first and then give Julie the last word.
I don't have anything new to add except for I think we need to continue to share the messages and address misconceptions. The work there is not done. We haven't reached the tipping point. We are seeing progress, but then we also, I think, can do that in a way that connects to people's emotions, sharing real stories, providing real opportunities for relational connection across culture through technology or other ways. Like, let's get creative how to bring people into this work. So invite, those of us who work in care reform or have nonprofits that are serving vulnerable families to keep doing that. Keep, making the connection to how this is an important shift in how we serve orphaned and vulnerable children. And then invite individual Christians, as Julie did earlier, to align your giving and going to support the values that you have for children, that they deserve the opportunity to grow up in a safe and loving family. And that we have an opportunity to be a part of something really cool in the world where we're seeing more and more kids get the chance to find that. So,
That's
yeah.
really good. All right, Julie, same question. Next steps as we respond to the data.
I think if you're an expert, a professional in care reform, slow down and make space to listen to those with whom we disagree. Treat this population of donors with respect and kindness, and let's bring them in. Let's view them as collaborators. If you are a funder who has any amount of money that you have to give away, whether you're leading a church mission department, any of that, give towards the most locally led solution you can find. Find the group of people on the ground. If you need help finding them, I'm assuming you can reach out to Brandon. He can reach out to me. I would be delighted to put you in touch with people that I know that are directly serving these kids. So if you are a funder who has that kind of capacity, then let's get behind the solutions that we know are better. And then if you're one of these US Christian donors, I think I just would want you to hear from someone who went from being an orphanage advocate to where I am now. I think I would want to tell you that I have not lost anything. And by losing my position as the hero in the story, the one that's rescuing kids through an orphanage, to now being someone who has gotten to visit single moms working with their kids, visiting grandmothers, visiting entire families who, yes, are living in challenging circumstances. This part of the story is so much better. It's so much more richer and profound. And I haven't lost the kids that I care about. I still know the names. I still know the stories. I still love those communities. And so I think I just would, if you're hesitant that you're going to lose that emotional piece or you're not going to feel as good about where your money is going, I just would love to invite you over here. I didn't lose anything. By relinquishing my role as the hero in the story, I have not only not lost anything, I have gained. And the people that I now know and get to support and champion, they're so much smarter than I ever was. They're so much better at this. The moms that I've met that are the most brilliant, resilient people you'll ever know, they are worth our support just as much as their kids are. And so I think I would want you to know what we're proposing to you is not a net loss, it's a net gain in every respect, including for you as the donor.
Yeah.
That
And
is,
I'd have to just, I realized that we hadn't shared any real stories, and I'm like, we need to tell stories. And I think, Julie, you're just highlighting how many, we have the privilege of hearing so many stories.
yeah.
So I'm just going to share one that I just opened up that Faith to Action wrote a while ago. That was one of my favorites. But Daniel, which his name was changed, he's a man who his wife died in childbirth. Okay, families in crisis. He had 3 children now. This was in Peru. And of course, he's grieving. He's overwhelmed. He has no way to like take care of these very young children while he's at work. He was working 6 days a week. Not a lazy guy. Not a drug addict. Not an abuser. Like he's working 6 days a week in the mining industry. So he, out of love for his children, took them to the orphanage to be cared for. He knew that they would get food there. They would get education. Get so much more than what he felt like he could do. But the cool part is that the orphanage was actually in this transformation of their thinking and their services. And so the first thing they did was listen and to understand what was going on and not assume that it was time to take that child from that grieving father. And they really committed to loving the father too, not just the child or the children. So they were assigned a caseworker for the family, not just the child. And they spent time with the family learning not just about the problems they were facing, but also the good things that they had, like the love that they had in their family, the community that they had, what the father wanted for that child. And they essentially looked at the broader community, the family environment, to identify who were other supporters that could help make this work. So other family members, even teachers or church members or neighbors. And at one point they did what we call like a family conference, and they brought a bunch of people together that cared for this family and said, what can we do to keep this family together? And, they had some very unorthodox, but really good, effective solutions. So one of the things that they did was that during the week, they actually decided that the children would stay with their grandmother in a town nearby because that was where the school was. And the older child, I believe, could go to the school. The organization provided a scholarship for the school to try to take away that burden. The church agreed to pay for formula because that newborn, and they didn't have a bunch of money for formula and all of that. And then there was like a local farmer or somebody that was driving back and forth between these 2 communities. So he was the neighbor that was going to take the child to grandma's house on Monday and back on Friday so that they could keep their bonds and connections with their dad. So not like a perfect solution. It's nothing that a donor in, California could have said, let's do this. But it worked, and it helped this grieving family avoid the trauma of separation and actually heal together.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of stories that Julie and Brandon and I get to hear all the time, but I think it's important that we share them as much as we can because it is really beautiful work, and we need to hear about it.
That's good. That's good. It's good work. It's godly work. And it's the thing that we should be putting our hand to. So, Julie, Elli, thank you both for coming on the show. It's great to catch up with you guys and dive into this data together.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon.
All right. And for our listeners, may Almighty God, who created us in his own image, grant us grace to fearlessly contend against evil and to make no peace with oppression, that we may reverently use our freedom and employ it in the maintenance of justice in our communities and among the nations, to the glory of God's holy name through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And we will catch you guys on the next episode of Think Global, Do Justice.